policy is to protect the most vulnerable for 2 years.
Liz Truss has just thrown down the gauntlet, slamming Keir Starmer and declaring him the UK's worst Prime Minister ever. In a fiery speech, she claimed the country is spiralling from bad to disastrous under Starmer's leadership. With Britain facing dark days ahead, marked by a declining economy and terrible international relations, Truss's accusations are sure to ruffle some feathers. Let's break it down.
I have been in office for just under 2 months, and I have delivered the energy price guarantee.
So, Liz Truss didn't mince any words. She accused Starmer of leading the UK into disaster. She said, they voted Labour, they didn't particularly like him, and now it's gone from bad to worse. That's some serious shade, and it's only getting started. Truss claims that under Starmer's leadership, the UK is appeasing enemies, spending money on fruitless green projects, and increasing the size of the welfare state. Like, can we all just take a moment to appreciate how she straight up called out these policies? She's saying they're doing all this while the energy prices are skyrocketing. But hey, that's not all. She also accused Starmer of being caught in scandals, like accepting donations for his wife's dresses. We're talking about some next-level drama here, and here's the kicker. She mentioned that the Labour Party's only real policy seems to be slamming the Conservatives, like no new ideas, just a lot of noise. So, what's really going on with the UK economy right now? Truss pulled no punches, saying that their economic policies are leading to stagnation. She brought up the closure of the last steelworks producing virgin steel because energy is just too expensive. Can you believe that? And instead of supporting fracking, which could lower energy costs, the Labour government is just shutting it down. She painted a picture that's pretty bleak. While countries like China and India are ramping up their coal-fired power stations, the UK is essentially turning off the lights. It feels like we're in a race to see who can be the least energy efficient, and spoiler alert, the UK is losing.
Well, I can assure the Right Honourable Gentleman that spending will go up next year and it will go up the year after. But of course, we need to get value for taxpayers' money. The Labour Party has pledged hundreds of billions of spending pledges, none of which they've retracted.
Now, let's talk about what Truss calls the blob. No, not a horror movie monster, but rather the unelected bureaucrats who, according to her, are sabotaging the elected government. She claims they've got more power than MPs. That's a bold statement. But she's saying that this bureaucratic power has grown over time, limiting what elected officials can actually do. Truss argues that it started during the Blair government, when legislation like the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act tied politicians' hands. So she's throwing major shade at past governments too. It's like a political hot potato. This is key. Truss believes it takes courage to fix these issues, and she feels there's been a massive courage deficit on the Conservative side. So if you're looking for bold moves from the government, it seems like Truss is saying we might be waiting a while. As if the political landscape wasn't messy enough, Truss dived into the culture wars. She accused Starmer's government of being out of touch with normal people in Britain. Her words, not mine. She believes the Labour Party is catering to an elite class obsessed with climate change and social issues, while regular folks are just trying to make ends meet. Can you imagine being in a country where your leaders don't even represent your interests? It's like living in a sitcom, where the characters have no idea what's going on in the real world. And let's be real. Most Brits just want their government to focus on the pressing issues like security, energy prices and the economy. Truss also called out the Labour Party for being anti-Israel and accused them of not recognising China as a significant threat.
I do think there has to be some reflection of economic reality from the party opposite.
Now, let's take a quick trip down memory lane. Liz Truss served as PM for only 49 days. Yes, you heard that right. Talk about a brief but chaotic stint. Her time in office was marked by economic turmoil, and her mini-budget was famously labelled a disaster. She's not exactly a household name for stability, right? But despite her rocky past, here she is, back in the spotlight, criticising Starmer as if she's got all the answers. Is it just me? Or does that seem a bit rich? It's like the pot calling the kettle black. But maybe she's trying to reclaim her narrative. Speaking of her time in office, during her speech, Truss revealed some interesting tidbits about herself, like her brand new Liberty Bell showerhead. Yes, you heard me correctly, a showerhead. She described it as a symbol of liberty and democracy, because nothing says freedom like a good shower. Now, you'd think after all that fiery rhetoric, there would be a huge wave of support for Truss, but nope, she's faced backlash from her own party. Former Tory Foreign Secretary slammed her for meddling in US politics. Sir Malcolm Rifkin said it was immature for her to intervene in another country's democratic processes, and I can't help but agree. Imagine if a US politician started commenting on our elections. It would cause chaos. Some Tories feel that Truss is just making things worse for her party. They're still reeling from her short-lived premiership, and now she's jumping into US politics. Polling shows that Starmer's ratings have taken a hit. But let's be real, is that all due to Truss's comments, or is it the policies and decisions made by his government? It's hard to say. The political landscape is so volatile right now that it feels like we're on a rollercoaster ride.
The former Prime Minister has a long list of people to blame for the economic misery. They don't want to hear it. They made her Prime Minister, and millions of people are paying the price.
Everyone knows that 2 years ago I wasn't afraid to repeatedly warn about what her economic policies would lead to, even if it wasn't what people wanted to hear at the time. Mr. Speaker, I was right then, but I'm also right now.
Everyone knows it's the Tory party's obsession with wild, unfunded tax cuts that crashed the economy. We know it, he knows it, they know it, and the whole country is living it.
When my predecessor was running for leader, to use his words, I did have the stomach to argue out loud about her economic policies, had the conviction to say that they were wrong, but not once, but twice. He tried to make his predecessor Prime Minister.
And with the general public increasingly frustrated with the rising cost of living and energy prices, many feel that neither party is offering real solutions. It's almost like they're too busy throwing shade at each other to focus on what really matters. So, where does this leave Keir Starmer? He's got a lot of work ahead of him if he wants to prove Truss wrong. He's promised to turn the page on an era of noisy performance and focus on rebuilding the country. But talk is cheap, right? Starmer has a hefty agenda with 40 proposed pieces of legislation, but can he deliver? Truss is already saying he's failed to do anything substantial. He needs to step up and show that he's not just another politician spouting empty promises. Now let's switch gears and talk about facts. In just over 100 days in office, Sir Keir Starmer has managed to make a name for himself, but not in a good way. It's hard to find a Prime Minister in British history whose first 100 days have been as catastrophic as his. Just take a look at the recent resignation of his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, on day 94. This is the latest event in an almost unbelievable string of blunders, all of which are largely self-inflicted. Now sure, Liz Truss only lasted 49 days, but let's not forget, she inherited a political landscape that was already chaotic, and she was not handed the keys to a well-oiled machine like Starmer was. The Labour leader came into power with one of the largest parliamentary majorities in history, and under our winner-takes-all political system that should have made governing a walk in the park. Yet, here we are, watching him navigate through scandal after scandal. Starmer's misfortunes stem from a combination of avarice, greed, and a shocking sense of entitlement. How else can we explain the actions of someone like Sue Gray? She was a senior civil servant, previously entrusted with upholding ethics at Downing Street, yet she seemed blissfully unaware of how her own conduct would come under scrutiny now that she's in the Labour camp. But here's the kicker. If Gray's actions were reckless, what does that say about Starmer, who appointed her? He's been dismissive of media scrutiny, telling journalists they shouldn't be poking their noses into his staff's behaviour. Funny, isn't it? This is the same guy who threw his predecessor Boris Johnson under the bus at every opportunity. And if we're going to start tossing around nicknames, let's just call him Sir Keir Scrounger. Not only is he guilty of misconduct for accepting Lord Ali's generosity, but he's also bungled the cover-up. In just 3 months, he's managed to alienate our allies, embolden our enemies, and squander the trust that the British public placed in him. From rewarding strikers while penalising pensioners to mishandling vital international relations, it's a textbook example of how not to govern. Starmer has lost popularity faster than any Prime Minister in modern history. He even faced a slap in the face from Rosie Duffield, one of his own brave and respected MPs, who resigned the Labour whip just weeks after being re-elected. Talk about losing control of your own party. When we look back at the history of British Prime Ministers, it's hard not to compare Starmer to some of the biggest failures. For 3 centuries, since Robert Walpole held the office, no one has managed to inflict such damage on their party, their country, and themselves in such a short period. Until Liz Truss came along, George Canning held the record for the shortest tenure at just 119 days. But Canning was known as a political genius, juggling responsibilities that would have made most people crumble under pressure. Starmer, in stark contrast, seems to have found a way to bungle just about everything he touches. Starmer seems to have a peculiar fixation on human rights and international law that clouds his judgment across the board, from immigration issues to the early release of violent criminals. We've had lawyers in Downing Street before, like Asquith or Blair, but none have left such a lasting stain on our national interest as he has. And let's not forget the tone of his leadership. Instead of lifting the spirits of the nation, as Churchill famously aimed to do, Starmer has managed to spread fear and despondency. When Starmer claimed he needed 2 or 3 terms to enact his vision for Britain, it seemed ambitious. But after just 100 days, it looks more likely that he won't even make it through one. The question on everyone's lips now is, when will he meet his Waterloo? If things don't turn around fast, Britain could be staring down the barrel of a political disaster, with dark days ahead as a declining economy and terrible international relations loom on the horizon. Now, as if Starmer's plate wasn't already overflowing, enter Liz, who's not just sitting on the sidelines, but actively weighing in with her critiques. Truss's recent takedown of Starmer was like a mic drop in the political arena, and it couldn't have come at a worse time for him.
Well, I notice, Mr. Speaker, he's not actually objecting to a single economic policy that the Chancellor announced on Monday.
So what do you think? Do you agree with Liz Truss's takedown? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.